Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we'll talk about immigrant children's rights with guests Maria Woltjen, Executive Director of the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights, and Francis de Pontes Peebles, a board member for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and questions submitted to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. Please do ask. We will try to get to those questions. They're so very enlightening and useful. So it's great to have you both here. We actually had the pleasure of interviewing your program director, Gladys Molina Alt, 3 months ago, prior to the presidential election. And of course, now the government has changed. There are new priorities. There are announced emphasis on immigration reform, which is long past due and has been pursued by multiple administrations from multiple parties. Let's talk about children first, and your efforts to try and help those children who are immigrants. And then we can broaden the discussion. Maria, could you just give us a grounding in the work that your organization does?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you so much for having us here this morning, Mark. It's really our pleasure. So the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights, we essentially have 2 programs. One is our Child Advocate Program, which Gladys Molina Alt talked about. We advocate for the best interests of unaccompanied children. We have offices in 8 locations around the country. So we advocate on getting kids out of custody, family reunification, and the ultimate decision about whether a child should remain in the United States. And of course, though, the children's wishes are paramount. And then we also have a policy division, which essentially takes the issues that we see on the ground with kids while we're serving as child advocates and use that to direct our national advocacy at the federal level, both on the Hill and also with the federal agencies to make the system more child appropriate, which it has not been.
And the important thing about unaccompanied children in particular is that they have no other representation. There's no family here that is accessible. Very often there are language barriers, right? Kids are afraid, kids are insecure. And so you are taking a role that is so unique and so important to that child's peace of mind, right? That it brings with it different dimensions than supporting immigrants who are adults, doesn't it?
Yeah, children are completely different. And one of the examples I give is if you can imagine a child, let's say he's 12 years old and he's been released from custody and he has a court hearing coming up and he has to find that federal court. He has to go into that building and find the courtroom. He has to walk into that courtroom. He doesn't speak English and figure out what's going on. And it's impossible for a child. It's very difficult for adults, but it's really difficult for kids. I mean, I get nervous walking into a courtroom if I don't know the judge. So you can imagine how a child feels walking in there. And our role, so there are attorneys who, through nonprofits who help the kids through the process, but our role is different. Our role is best interests. And we also stay on the case from the moment we meet the children while they're in immigration detention all the way through and continuing after they're released from custody. And our role is really arguing for their safety. And that's different from adults. We're arguing for their safety because they're children and because they are unique because they're children and distinct from adults. And the biggest problem being that the system was intended for adults and not for children.
It's a major gap. Francis, how did you get involved as a board member? Because you can spend your volunteer time in a number of different ways. Why this particular issue? Why did that connect with your heart?
Well, I had heard amazing things about the Young Center from another board member who was a friend of mine. and she's an immigration attorney now turned chaplain. And she asked me to help, to participate. I think as a mother, it was very important to me. As a bicultural person, I came to the United States from Brazil when I was 4 years old. That really struck a nerve. And also just as a human being, when I think about an unaccompanied child coming to our doorstep essentially and asking for help, what is our responsibility to that child? And how can we best help that child that's not in a law enforcement stance or a criminalization stance, but in a stance of being humanitarians? So that was really important to me when I decided to join this organization. And they do such an amazing job. They're actually the only nonprofit that has child advocates that go in and visit children in detention, and they visit them weekly, and they give them kind of a connection. They give them human bonds and also advocate for these children and for the best interests of these children, which no one is doing in this system.
Do you, in a sense, see yourself when you see these children? Had you not had parents around you, had you not had the support around you?
I mean, my situation is every situation, I think, when it comes to coming to this country is unique. And that's what makes immigration so complex. My father was an American citizen, so we didn't have that barrier. Of course, as a writer, I immediately feel my empathy drawn to these children. And as a mother, ultimately, what's interesting is I don't think of them as if I were in their shoes. I think of their parents. I think of, as a mother, if I was in such a dire situation, no one wants to leave their home, the place where they grow up, their place where they have their culture and their friends and their neighbors, unless something truly dire is happening, for them to have to cross so many borders and go through so much hardship to finally come to our border. And imagine doing that alone as a child. And that really, it breaks my heart, but it also allows me to see, wow, how amazing and courageous and resourceful these children are, and how can we best help them. So if anything, I see them through a mother's eyes and want to help them in that way.
What I find so interesting is that when you look at our media, we tend to look at celebrities, sports heroes, political figures, and so on and so forth. But really, it's common citizens like ourselves who are driving change and driving the nation in particular ways. Maria, when you build your team, how do you select individuals who both have the competencies and the heart to do the right thing for these children? Because they are the leaders. They are the leaders of the nation in this area, aren't they?
Right. So, I mean, our staff come from a variety of backgrounds. Many of our staff are immigrants or the children of immigrants, and this issue is very personal. We also do work. We recruit volunteers, and the way it works is they're the ones who go into the facilities and meet with the kids and learn their stories. And then we, as attorneys and social workers, do the strategy work and the advocacy work with that information, knowing what the child wants for themselves. And so, the volunteers are also, for the most part, they have to be bilingual. It's a requirement. We need for them to be able to speak to the kids without an interpreter in the room or without a telephonic interpreter. And but most of our volunteers are also, many of them are also bicultural. And really, that's important too, because that helps them to understand what these kids are going through.
This is so important, right? The idea, and this is something that we've embedded on the search side of our work, and also in this media work that we're doing. This idea of cultural competencies being an actual competence, linguistic competencies being an actual professional competence, right? An understanding of different lived experiences because of your own life. And you're talking about knitting together a staff of different ethnicities,
Mhm.
right? Of different languages, of different sensibilities, of different capabilities, all to create this professional product. So the question of diversity, inclusion, and these kinds of issues, it's kind of all baked in, isn't it?
It is. And I have to admit though, that we are working, as many organizations are, we are imperfect. Many of our staff are persons of color, but certainly not our whole staff. And we, are very intentionally, both within the organization and on the board, working towards ensuring that we really are implementing, not just saying it, but that we're implementing the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion. In all organizations need to do that, but our clients are children coming from all over the world, so it's really especially important that we do that.
Francis, we got a question, a very interesting one. It's kind of more in the form of an assertion that the immigration system is broken by design. It's meant to be broken. It's meant to be dysfunctional. As a volunteer, do you feel that America's immigration system is intentionally broken?
Um, I'm not sure if it's intentional or a product of lingering fear of the other that has been with us, for centuries. I think that the issue with our immigration system right now is twofold. I think the first is that it's so entangled with criminality. And I think it needs to be more enmeshed with human rights and humanitarianism.
So let me just get this straight. So when you say entangled with criminality, you're saying that the idea of violation results in an identification of the person as being a criminal, as
Correct. Yes.
opposed to being somebody who is a refugee or is fleeing some sort of situation that all of us would want to flee. So it's while laws have been broken, it's not a criminal act in your mind. It belongs in a different category and should be treated differently. That's what you're basically saying.
Yes, definitely.
It's not that these people are bank robbers and drug dealers and so on and so forth, right? You're not going to have a 12-year-old refugee who is coming in to knock over your local convenience store.
Correct. Yes. I think that for a long time, it's almost been like a penal system, the immigration system. And what it needs to be is more of a social system where we help people. We try to fact find instead of be suspicious. We try to understand why they're coming here, what they need, what they would need to succeed, or in a child's case, what's in that child's best interests? How can we help them? And sometimes what's in that child's best interest is to go back to their home country. But if we don't act as kind of curious fact finders in a humane way, then we'll never know what's in their best interests. And so I do think that the immigration system is broken also because there's no separate system for children. Children are treated as adults in our immigration system right now, and children are not adults. And children need a different kind of care, and they need a different kind, especially children who come here alone, unaccompanied. They need a completely different system. We have a child system here in our legal system. Why don't we have a system of immigration dedicated to children? So in that sense, I do think that we need kind of a reimagining of our immigration system and just a restructuring from the bottom to the top.
We just did a poll, and it looks like 98% of the respondents feel that there's a considerable consensus that the immigration system is broken. In terms of addressing some of the needs that we have now, Maria, and how you train your people, we got a question from Erica about how you train your people to fill those gaps. And the specific question is whether the advocates are trained with a similar model as is that of the GAL and CASAs nationally. How do you train your people so that they can provide this service?
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, do we train them similar to guardians ad litem? Is that the question?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it. So yes, our role is very similar to a guardian ad litem, whose job it is to advocate for the best interests of the child. We train our staff to be very careful not to impose their own views on the child. We're very careful not to be paternalistic about these kids. But our role, and I can give you, kind of the starkest example of a situation. It's very rare for us to go against what a child wants. But an example would be a child who comes into this country. He's 12 years old and he says, my entire family was killed. I know that if I go back, I'll be killed. So that child is eligible for protection in this country. His family was killed for political reasons. But now he's been in immigration custody detention for 8 months. And he goes to the lawyer and says, I can't take this anymore. I just want to go back to my home country. The lawyer tries to convince him not, but she can't. And so her job is to tell the immigration judge, my client wants to return to home country. And then the judge turns to us and says, Miss Molina or Ms. Woltjen, do you have anything to say? And we would tell the judge it's not in his best interest. It's not safe. His life will be at risk. And we can't just say it's dangerous in Honduras. We have to give very fact-based information about that child. And again, we rarely go against what the child wants, but in that situation, he's asking for that because he has what we call detention fatigue. He can't take being in custody any longer.
Wafa Kanan asked, how do these young people get into the United States? In general, I know that you've done studies to see how people arrive here. Could you just sort of break up the cohorts of those arrivals for us?
Sure. Today, most people, including most children, are arriving at our southern border, the US-Mexico border. They're traveling all different ways. We also, we have most of the kids coming today are coming from Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, but we have kids coming from Somalia, Ghana, China, India. And today, most of them are also traveling through South America, Central America, and to the US-Mexico border. So the way it works is they arrive at the border, and if things are working properly, there's a Customs and Border Patrol official who will ask them a series of questions. For kids who are not from a contiguous country, so that's Mexico, they are taken into custody here in the United States and transferred to a different agency. It's Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement, and they have shelters around the country. So the kids are placed in the shelter. The minute they land there in the shelter, the people in the facility work to try to find family in the US. Some kids may have a parent here. Some kids have aunts, uncles, grandparents, siblings. And our policy and law is that kids can be released from custody to family. It does not mean they have permission to stay. They're still in deportation proceedings. But the idea behind it is it's not good for kids to be detained. So we want them to be released to family while they're going through this deportation proceeding.
Can we talk a little bit about the creative tension that exists between the governance body, the board, and the staff leadership? Because the board is there to support your work. It's there to fundraise for you, but it's also there as a fiduciary to provide oversight and to hold you, Maria, accountable. So, Francis, how do you hold Maria's feet to the fire and as a group? And are there situations where you've identified a need and you all have some difficult discussions about how to fulfill that need. Could you just talk about how governance works?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the people, Maria especially, everyone at the Young Center is so passionate about what they do, so deeply caring, so talented, that as a board, it's our job to uplift them and to give them the resources that they need to keep helping more children. And so ultimately, we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. And there, since I've been on the board, there really hasn't been a time when we haven't been rowing in the same direction. And so I think that because there exists that deep care and passion in the staff and the lawyers and the child advocates, and Maria sets that tone, as a board, it makes our job of governance all that much easier. We do have a lot of strategic planning. Of course, in the last 4 years, there's been a lot of shifts in terms of how do we react to these policies, and going from proactive stance to more of reactive stance in the last 4 years. And so we've had a lot of discussions about that, and a lot of discussions about growth. How do we grow? Where do we go in the future? And how do we not even out, but how do we kind of grow our policy work? Not only the child advocate work, but kind of the global policy work. But in terms of governance, we are all working toward the same goal, which is helping more children and changing our immigration system to be more child friendly. So that's our main role as a board.
So governance is always in association with the mission.
Yes.
Try to add your skills and sensibilities and counsel to Maria's staff role. So there's not a lot of tension in the system, but there is this intense focus on that mission. And were there to be a deviation, you would actually, your role is to bring people back to that center, right?
Definitely. And I think the wonderful thing about our board is it's so diverse in so many ways. And so we not only have immigration attorneys, other kinds of attorneys, business people, a chaplain, artists like myself. And so because we have all of these diverse voices, we also have someone who was an unaccompanied child when they were a child. And so I think that kind of range of voices allows us as a board to really kind of enrich our conversations and to help us stay on track with our mission. And, I think Maria and everyone that works at the Young Center is an essential part of that. And so, yes, we always go back to that mission. And so if there is ever tension, the tension is from the outside, what are we going to do today? And how do we react to this? And we really try to stay united because that's the way that we can help more children.
We've received a couple of questions along those lines. My father in Germany asked about how do you view the progress that is being made now and is planned going into the future in terms of the change of administration, in terms of this whole issue that we all saw, children being kept in really terrible situations in cages and such, and some of the changes that you're seeing. Maria, what do you anticipate is going to be the policies, and what has changed through executive orders very quickly?
Sure. Well, obviously, we're very excited about the change in administration. And as Francis mentioned, I mean, we have been in mode for the last 4 years, and now there's a real opportunity not to be in defensive mode, and also not to return to what some people would consider normal, which is the way it was 4 years ago, but to make real progress. And what that means is, developing, as Francis mentioned, a new system for kids that treats children like children. And I will say that we're very hopeful that we've met many of the people, or we know some of the people on the transition committees. We're very hopeful that these federal agencies will be more receptive under this new administration. And there already have been changes. President Biden came in and on his first day in office signed executive orders, halting the building of the border wall. What's really important is pausing deportations for 100 days, because a lot of people who are slated for deportation they're not criminals. They may not have status here in the United States, but they haven't done anything wrong. And so I think refocusing the goals of our Department of Homeland Security, and I think that's the reason they've halted deportations for 100 days, is to step back and really think about it. And then there's also the protections for dreamers, for young people eligible for DACA. They've just been living with, a sword over their heads for the last 4 years, and it's been back and forth and back and forth. And I think now we have a lot of hope that we will be able to pass legislation. President Biden put in place an executive order, and the next step obviously will need to be legislation to protect these young people permanently.
It seems that there's a lot of consensus in the nation. Our polls bear this out. Now, of course, it's a select audience of people who are interested in this issue, but 98, 97% believe that immigrant children should be treated differently
Right.
than adults, and a similar percentage believe that DACA recipients, people who have grown up from childhood on only knowing this country, should be welcomed as citizens, and there should be a path to citizenship. I think the really big question is, how do we systemically adjust this system? Right now, it looks like it's running on goodwill and gap filling by nonprofits.
Right.
We received a question about the relationship between ORR, so Office of Refugee Resettlement, case managers, and your child advocates. There are a lot of staff that, even when they must constrain children in terrible conditions, they're really trying to do the right thing within the constraints of their role. And it seems like there's sort of a confluence of human interest here that really needs to be encapsulated in our laws and how we work systemically. What are the next changes that are going to be required to move from just human goodwill to systematic action?
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is really important. And I think it's going to require a lot of attention from the public. And, the example I would give is family separation. There was just a consensus and a groundswell of attention to this. And it's the reason that the Trump administration stopped separating parents from children across the board. It is still happening in some instances, but it stopped. And that is what we need to happen now. We need more than the advocates speaking out. And we need the public to really understand what's going on and understand the importance of changing the system. And it is going to be, there are really good people at all levels of the system who are trying to do the right thing, but we need to change it. We need to change our regulations. We need to change the entire system. We need to welcome children. It's what we do in our child welfare systems, as Frances mentioned. We don't just shut the door and, say, go away in our child welfare system. So why is it that we would treat immigrant children any differently? Our job needs to be to make sure that the next place they're going to be safe, which is exactly the same way that we intend to care for our kids who end up in our U.S. child welfare systems.
It's such a great point. Frances, we're coming to the end of our time, so I'm going to give you the last word. What is your wish and the wish of the board for involvement of American citizens in support of children who are immigrants. How would you advise us all to think about this problem?
I think we need to change the narrative about immigration in the sense of making it more of a humanitarian crisis rather than a fear-based narrative. I also think that the public can help in so many ways. Mainly, they can donate to nonprofits like the Young Center so that the Young Center can continue doing its work. They can write to their representatives. They can talk to their representatives. They can say, you know what, children need a separate immigration system. Why isn't this happening? This can easily happen. Children need legal representation. They need a completely separate immigration system. And the other thing is they can volunteer, not only with the Young Center, but there's so many organizations. They can be a child advocate and actually have a one-on-one relationship with these children. And by doing that, then talk about it in a way that changes the narrative. What we need is just a huge kind of cultural shift around immigration. And I think that the US and US citizens, US people who live here in the United States are so creative and so empathic that we can do this. We can really make this change.
Well, that's such a wonderful point, Frances. You know, there are so many different ways in which we can, as citizens, beneficially impact American civil society. Thank you so much for your service as a volunteer and a board member. Maria, great to see you. Thank you for sharing the work of the Young Center. That's the nonprofit report. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for your questions. I hope that you felt that we were able to get to most of them and to honor them. The next nonprofit report on Thursday is going to be about conserving species, in this particular case, aquatic species. We're going to be talking with CEOs of the Florida Aquarium, the Tennessee Aquarium, and the New England Aquarium. I hope you'll be able to join us. And thank you so much for doing what you can for immigrant children and for helping us bring this program to everyone. Everybody stay safe. That's the nonprofit report. Have a great day. Take care.